let's talk about the third and final risk factor that causes a greater likelihood of election violence in a given country. And this is if people are doubting the legitimacy of their government. So let's pause here a second, because the question is whether people are doubting the legitimacy of the government. The question here is not whether there actually is a problem with the legitimacy of the government. That's actually extremely important. It matters a lot whether the election process really is fair. But what we're talking about here is whether people are doubting that it's fair or doubting that the government is legitimately in place. And that's definitely something that's happening in this country. There's a significant percentage of Republicans who legitimately do not believe that the executive branch is legitimately elected. And there is a percentage of Democrats who honestly do not believe that the Supreme Court is legitimately exercising its authority. Now, I'm going to be honest with you here and just tell you what my personal belief is. My personal belief is that both of those things are untrue, that the executive branch, whether we like what it's doing or not, was legitimately elected, and what the judicial branch is doing, whether we like it or not, was legitimately put in place. But I am not going to try to talk you out of what you think if you think differently, because that's not actually a violence prevention technique. Instead, the question that I want to ask is what needs to happen for you to also believe honestly and trust that the government is legitimately elected. This is about observing patterns. If doubt exists, people are more likely to think that violence is necessary because they don't believe that the election process itself is working the way that it should. So there are a couple of ways that we can actually interrupt this pattern and counteract this belief. Here's the first one. If you genuinely don't believe that the government is illegitimately in place, if you don't believe that, but you're saying it anyway, or you're repeating rumors, or you're spreading memes where people are questioning the legitimacy of the government. So again, if you think that they are legitimate, but you're spreading rumors that they're not, that's really dangerous behavior, and please stop. But if you believe honestly that there is reason to question the legitimacy, let's talk about some steps we can take to make sure that you don't need to be asking those questions anymore. Basically, we counteract this by saying, let's make sure that elections are fair. Let's also make sure that elections are perceived as fair, which is a separate issue. And then make sure that there are some nonviolent ways to hold elected politicians accountable. I'll dig into all of those pieces a little bit later in a different video, but for now, I want to point you toward the Braver Angels Trustworthy Elections Report. Let me say that again. The Braver Angels Trustworthy Elections Report. If you Google that, you'll have a report come up that shows the results of a long process, 2-year process, with conservatives and liberals working together to come up with solutions for ways to make sure that our elections are fair and perceived as fair. Go read it. It's pretty actually amazing. So let's go back and review, talk about what I've talked about with these risk factor videos. First of all, people who are full-time experts cannot predict whether there will be election violence in a given location. It simply can't be predicted accurately, at least not so far. But what we can do is describe some of the conditions that often exist in a place before election violence happens. One of those is a recent history of election violence. A second one is politicians that are using blame-based rhetoric. And a third one is people who doubt the legitimacy of their government. And we counter that doubt by making sure that elections are both fair and perceived as fair. The next video that I plan to put together is a common question when people ask, why focus on behaviors and patterns rather than focusing on people?